In this lesson, we'll learn how to create control curves. We're now ready to design a really neat control system for our airship. What I'd like to do first is head over to the Show menu and hide a few objects that we really don't need to be concerned with right now. So I'll go ahead and uncheck cameras and also textures to hide our 3D texture node. Great, so that way when we go in and select objects, we're just working with the objects we need to rig. Alright, so why build a control object in the first place? Why couldn't we go in and select all of our pieces here and start to move them around? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at this. If we try to move our airship, you can see that a few of the pieces are moving opposite from the rest of our model. The reason why is because of their orientation. So control objects help us to prevent issues like this. It's just an efficient way of animating. Instead of having to deal with so many pieces and animate on so many meshes, we're just focused on one main control and a few attributes. So that being said, we're going to head over to our top view to design a control object that would be convenient for this asset. Let's go ahead and hold down the space bar to enter our hotbox, and now we can go ahead and left click on our Maya icon in the center and choose the top view. So at this point, we'll head over to our create menu. We're going to work with the CV curve tool to design a curve control. So we'll move over to our options and reset the settings. I like to work with curves because by default they're non-renderable. So after resetting our settings, we'll go ahead and work with a linear curve degree. And now we can go ahead and snap out an arrow shape. Let's go ahead and zoom into our grid. And you can follow my lead. I'll hold down the X key. And again, we'll just create a very simple shape. Okay, so at this point, we can move back to our perspective view. So I'll hold down the space bar. Again, we'll click on our Maya icon. And once back in the perspective view, let's go ahead and take a look at our control. We can see that, all right, right now this isn't ideal. One of the rules I like to keep in mind when designing controls is that they need to be easy to select. And also, they need to be very clear as to what they control. So with our control in the spot it's in right now, that's not ideal. The animator would get very annoyed. So that being said, let's go ahead and start to scale up this object. Now you can see its pivot is right at the center of our scene. If I were to hit the 4 key to go to wireframe mode, we can go ahead and take a look at that. So if we try to resize this object using the scale tool, let's go ahead and hit the R key and start to scale from the center. Again, that's not very convenient at all. However, what we can do is use the center pivot tool to center this pivot to the selected object. So with it selected, let's go ahead and head over to modify and choose center pivot. Much better. So now when we scale, it's a lot easier to resize this. So at this point, we can move back to shaded mode with the 5 key. And I'll just go ahead and resize this so that if we were to center this curve to our airship, I'll just go ahead and move this in place. I'll show you a way to snap this to the object center, but for right now we're just moving this roughly in place just to get the size the way we would like it to fit on our airship. Alright, so once we are set on a decent size for this control, we can then go ahead and worry about centering it. A quick way to do that is to snap to the pivot of our object. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. Let's go ahead and head over to our outliner and grab the ship group. If we were to go to wireframe mode, you can see that the pivot is right at the origin of our scene. So in this case, it's very convenient. It's just a matter of grabbing the control object and snapping to the grid. However, what if that wasn't the case? Well, what you can do is simply select the object you'd like to snap to and head over to Display, Transform Display, Local Rotation Axes. That will show us the handle that's tied to our current selection. If you don't see this object under the Show menu, you'll want to make sure you have handles turned on. Okay, great. So at this point, we can now go ahead and select our curve. And take a look at that. We were kind of close. But let's go ahead and select in the center of our Move tool. That way we can move in all axes again. I'll hold down the V key, and we can now middle mouse button drag to snap to our local rotation handle. And now at that point, we no longer need to see this handle. So I'll go ahead and select the Ship group again. And now we can head back over to our local rotation axes tool to hide it. Alright, beautiful. So now that the object has been centered, the next step is to go ahead and freeze the transforms on our control. So let's go ahead and head over to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Much better. So now this is all clean. Notice we don't have any nodes that we'll need to use the Delete History tool for. But what we do want to do is rename this object, because Curve 1, that's going to do nothing but cause problems. The animator will complain, what is Curve 1? What am I supposed to do with that? So let's go ahead and rename this to something more convenient that pertains to our mesh. I like to use a prefix of CC for control curve underscore followed by the object name, which is ship 01. The 01 makes it clear as to how many of these objects exist in this scene. If we were to ever duplicate this curve, which you can do with Control D, now we can see that there is another object of this type, and this basically means that we'd either need to remove the object or rename it if we decide to use it elsewhere for another asset. Alright, so I'll now go in and remove the object I've just duplicated. There we go. And at this point, we're ready to now connect our ship to our control object. So to do that, we'll need to use a tool called parenting. Parenting basically connects the transforms of the object we'd like to be the child to our parent object. So we have a few ways we can do that inside of Maya. What we'd first want to do is select the object we'd like to be the child. So right now, let's go ahead and work with the ship group. And then we would select our parent object. So let's go ahead and control click our ship control. And at that point, we can head over to Edit and choose the parent tool. Notice the hotkey P. So if we go and choose this, you can see now when we select our curve, we're now driving the entire ship. Very convenient. However, what we are going to do is rearrange this hierarchy we've just created. It's basically a list of objects that are being controlled. So what we'll do is have the ship be the main parent of our entire rig so that it can act as a global control to reposition and resize the ship with ease in case we need to do so for a certain shot. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and expand our ship group. And what we'll do is grab all of the pieces inside of our ship group, including our 3D texture node. Let's go ahead and shift select and grab them all. And now we will middle click and drag to our ship control. So that's another way to parent. So you can see all of those objects now exist underneath our control here. And what we'll now need to do is separate the ship from our ship control in order for the ship to be the global control node we'll need. So we can either drag outside of the hierarchy, and I'm just middle mouse button dragging, point where we see a line, not necessarily a border around the object, because that means that we would parent to the object. So again, just want to drag until we see just a line, a separator. So that's one way to unparent. Another way, if we were to undo, is to use the hotkey Shift P. And here's the tool from the edit menu. All right, so with the ship selected, I'll go ahead and use Shift P, and now it is no longer a part of the ship control. All right, great. So I'll now go ahead and collapse the ship's hierarchy. And with the ship control selected, we can control click our ship group and use the hotkey P to parent. Beautiful. So now again, the ship group controls everything. When we get into motion paths, this is going to be very convenient because when we connect the ship to our path, it's going to lock down some of our properties in the channel box. However, we can then use our ship control to animate freely if we'd like to add offsets. So that's much more animator friendly. Okay, great. So at this point, we're basically done with this lesson. I'd like to point out just one more thing. If you wanted to, you can go to the status bar at the top and turn off mesh selection. So what that means is you won't go in and accidentally select any piece on your ship. However, you can go in and select the ship control. So I find that to be a bit more convenient at times. All right, but again, that concludes this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to organize our rig using display layers.